What the Crusaders did in Constantinople was worse than you imagine a historical drama in 5 chapters. Constantinople, Byzantine Empire, April 1204 to January 1205. The morning of April 12, 1204, began like any other in the convent of the Theotokos Pamakaristos. Sister Theodora sat in the scriptorium, her brush moving with practiced precision across the vellum page, adding gold leaf to the illuminated letter she had spent 3 days preparing. At 45 years old, her eyes still held their sharpness, though she now worked closer to the window to catch the morning light that streamed through the narrow opening overlooking the Golden Horn. The convent occupied a modest compound in the northeastern quarter of Constantinople, far enough from the imperial palace to maintain its contemplative peace, yet close enough to the Blachernay walls to hear the city's rhythms. For 27 years, Theodora had called this place home, ever since her father, a textile merchant who had lost everything to Venetian competitors, delivered her to Abbess Irene with trembling hands and tears in his eyes. "The Crusaders' ships are closer today," whispered Sister Anna, the youngest novice at 19, her voice barely audible over the scratch of quills on parchment. The girl had been with them only 8 months, still adjusting to the weight of the black veil and the discipline of silence during work hours. Theodora did not look up from her manuscript, though her hand paused for the briefest moment. "We have survived sieges before, child. The Theodosian walls have protected this city for 800 years. They will hold." But even as she spoke, Theodora felt the lie settle heavy in her chest. This was different. These were not Persians or Arabs at the gates. These were Christians, Latin Christians from France and Flanders and Venice, men who wore the cross on their surcoats and claimed to march in service of God. They had arrived the previous year, ostensibly on their way to liberate Jerusalem from the Saracens. But they had lingered in Byzantine waters, entangled in imperial politics and Venetian scheming. The Emperor Alexios IV, who had promised them gold and military support, was dead, murdered in a palace coup just 3 months ago. His successor, Alexios V Murtzouphlos, had refused to honor those extravagant promises. Now the Crusaders demanded payment they would never receive, and their patience had run out. Abbess Irene entered the scriptorium, her spine still straight despite her 72 years, her face composed in that expression of serene authority that had guided the convent through 2 decades of her leadership. "Sisters, set aside your work. Come to the chapel." There was something in her tone, not quite fear, but a tightness that made Theodora's stomach clench. She carefully closed the pot of gold leaf, cleaned her brush, and followed the other nuns through the covered walkway to the chapel. 16 women in total, ranging from Anna's 19 years to Sister Eupraxia's 81, gathered before the altar, where a silver icon of the Theotokos, the Mother of God, gazed down with Byzantine formality and infinite compassion. "The walls have been breached," Abbess Irene said without preamble. "Near the Petria Gate, Latin soldiers are in the city." A collective intake of breath, sharp as a knife. Sister Eupraxia swayed, and Theodora moved quickly to support the elderly woman's elbow. "They will come here?" asked Sister Maria, who managed the convent's small infirmary. She was 38, practical-minded, her hands perpetually stained with herbs. "They will come everywhere," Irene replied. Her voice remained steady, but her fingers tightened on the golden cross she wore. "We must prepare for the worst while praying for mercy. Sister Theodora, you will take the youngest sisters to the cellar beneath the kitchen. Sister Maria, gather what medical supplies you can carry. The rest of you, remove anything of obvious value from the chapel. We will hide what we can." "Mother Abbess," Theodora said carefully, "should we not flee the city entirely? My brother has a farm near Nicomedia." "There is no time," Irene interrupted. "The Crusaders control the harbor. Every gate will be choked with refugees. We stay, we hide, and we trust in God's protection." What followed was controlled chaos. Theodora helped Sister Anna and the other younger nuns into the root cellar, a damp stone space beneath the kitchen that smelled of earth and preserved vegetables. She brought down blankets, water, bread, and made them promise to stay silent no matter what they heard above. "Will you come down too, sister?" Anna asked, her dark eyes wide with fear. Theodora touched the girl's cheek gently. "I must help secure the chapel. If no one comes for you by nightfall, wait until you hear 3 knocks, pause, then 2 more. That will be me. Do you understand?" Anna nodded, though tears streaked her face. Above ground, Theodora worked alongside Sister Maria and the older nuns to strip the chapel of its treasures. They removed the golden candelabras, the jeweled gospel covers, the silk altar cloths embroidered with silver thread. Everything went into a large wooden chest, which 6 of them carried to a false panel behind the sacristy. The silver icon of the Theotokos they could not remove. It was fixed to the wall, a gift from the Emperor Constantine Monomachos 2 centuries earlier. Abbess Irene stood before it for a long moment, her lips moving in silent prayer. Outside, the sounds of the city changed. The normal daytime noise, merchants calling their wares, cartwheels on cobblestones, church bells marking the hours, gave way to something else. Screaming, the crash of breaking wood, and underneath it all, a roar like a beast awakening, the collective voice of an army unleashed from discipline. Theodora moved to the window of the refectory. From this vantage point on the convent's 2nd floor, she could see across the rooftops toward the heart of the city. Smoke rose in thick columns from at least a dozen locations. As she watched, a tower near the Forum of Constantine collapsed in a shower of sparks, and the screaming intensified. "Sweet Mother of God," breathed Sister Eupraxia, who had come to stand beside her. "They're burning the libraries. They're burning everything." Sister Maria joined them, her face pale. "I can see people running through the streets. The soldiers are chasing them. I saw a man dragged off a horse, and—" She stopped, pressing her hand to her mouth. Theodora pulled both women away from the window. "We cannot watch. We cannot help them. We can only do what the abbess instructed." But even as she spoke, she knew their preparations were insufficient. What could 16 women do against an army? What protection could stone walls and locked doors provide when the men outside had siege equipment and battering rams? The afternoon crawled past with agonizing slowness. They gathered in the chapel, all except the youngest nuns hidden below, and prayed. Theodora's knees ached against the stone floor, but she welcomed the discomfort. It kept her focused, kept the rising panic at bay. Abbess Irene led them through the Akathist hymn, their voices rising and falling in the ancient Greek words that had been sung in this city for centuries. "Rejoice, O unwedded bride! Rejoice, restoration of the fallen Adam." The sounds outside Theodora could hear individual voices now, shouting in Latin and French. The clash of weapons, a woman's scream cut short, the crash of a door being smashed open somewhere nearby. Then footsteps in their courtyard. The nuns fell silent. Theodora felt Sister Eupraxia's hand find hers in the dimness, the elderly woman's fingers cold and trembling. Abbess Irene stood and walked to the chapel door, positioning herself between her nuns and whatever was coming. The pounding, when it came, rattled the entire building, wood splintering, men's voices rough with drink and excitement, shouting words Theodora couldn't fully understand, but whose intent was unmistakable. "Open! Open in the name of Christ and the Holy Crusade!" Irene's voice rang out, clear and commanding despite her age. "This is a house of God, a convent of the Holy Orthodox Church. You have no right—" The door exploded inward. 4 men stumbled through, wearing the Red Cross of Crusaders on surcoats stained with wine and blood. They were young, perhaps mid-20s, their faces flushed with drink and the madness that had seized the city. The tallest one, with a scar across his left cheek, looked around the chapel with bleary eyes. When his gaze fell on the silver icon of the Theotokos, his face lit up with greed. "Look at this, brothers! These Greek whores have been holding out on us!" He strode toward the icon, and Abbess Irene moved to block him. "That is sacred. You cannot—" The blow caught her across the face, sending her stumbling backward. At 72, she had no chance of keeping her balance. Theodora watched in horror as her abbess fell, her head striking the stone step before the altar with a sickening crack. "Mother!" The word tore from Theodora's throat before she could stop it. She rushed forward, dropping to her knees beside Irene's crumpled form. Blood pooled beneath the abbess's white hair, spreading across the floor in a dark stain. Irene's eyes fluttered open, unfocused. Her lips moved, forming words Theodora had to lean close to hear. "Protect them. Protect." Then her eyes went still, fixed on something beyond this world. Theodora looked up at the Crusaders, rage and grief warring in her chest. "You've killed her. She was an old woman, devoted to God, and you've murdered her." The scarred soldier laughed. "Old bitch shouldn't have gotten in the way. Now the rest of you line up against that wall, and don't try anything stupid." What happened next would scar Theodora's memory forever. The soldiers ransacked the chapel, tearing down tapestries, smashing the wooden pews to search for hidden valuables, prying at the silver icon until they managed to wrench it from the wall, leaving a gaping wound in the plaster. They found the wine stores in the sacristy and drank deeply, becoming even more unpredictable and violent. When one of them grabbed Sister Eupraxia and demanded to know where the gold was hidden, Theodora stepped forward. "I'll show you. Leave her alone. She knows nothing. I'm the one who manages the convent's affairs." It was a lie, but it bought time. She led two of the soldiers on a meandering path through the convent, showing them the empty treasury, the bare storerooms, anything to keep them away from the chapel where the other nuns huddled in terror, away from the kitchen beneath which Anna and the youngest sisters hid. But eventually they grew tired of her stalling. The scarred soldier grabbed her by the arm, his fingers digging into her flesh hard enough to leave bruises. "You're playing games with us, nun. Where is it?" "There is nothing," Theodora said, forcing herself to meet his eyes. "We are a poor convent. We survive on donations that have dried up since you blockaded the harbor. There is no gold here." He studied her face, then shrugged. "Then I guess we'll have to find other entertainment." He shoved her toward the refectory, where his companions had gathered with the other nuns. Theodora's heart sank as she saw they had found the cellar entrance. Anna and 3 other young nuns stood huddled together, their faces streaked with tears. What followed was the darkest night of Theodora's life. The soldiers, emboldened by wine and the absence of any authority to check them, committed acts that shattered every vow of protection, every promise of Christian brotherhood that the crusade had proclaimed. Theodora tried to shield the younger women, offering herself instead, but there were too many soldiers. More had arrived, drawn by the sounds of revelry, and too few ways to protect everyone. She lost consciousness at some point, a mercy her body granted her. When she woke, it was to find Sister Maria bent over her, pressing a damp cloth to her forehead. The chapel was destroyed, the walls marked with obscenities, the altar cloth torn and bloodied. Around her, the other nuns were slowly stirring, helping each other, speaking in hushed, broken voices. Abbess Irene's body still lay where she had fallen, her blood now dried to a dark stain. Someone had closed her eyes and folded her hands across her chest. "How many?" Theodora croaked, her throat raw. "We're all alive," Maria said quietly, "though I don't know how many will wish to remain so when morning comes." Sister Anna sat against the wall, rocking slightly, her eyes vacant. The young novice who had asked Theodora if she would come to the cellar, who had been so eager to learn the art of manuscript illumination, was gone. In her place was someone Theodora didn't recognize, someone broken in ways that might never fully heal. Outside, the city continued to burn. The sack of Constantinople had only just begun. The fires burned for 3 days. Theodora stood at what remained of the convent's second-floor window, watching smoke darken the April sky until day was indistinguishable from night. The great libraries of Constantinople, repositories of knowledge dating back to ancient Rome, texts that existed nowhere else in the world, went up in flames because crusaders needed light to continue their looting after dark, or because they couldn't read Greek and assumed the books were worthless, or simply because destruction had become its own intoxication. She had stopped crying on the second day. Tears seemed obscene in the face of such comprehensive devastation, too small a response to encompass what had been lost. Instead, she felt a curious numbness settling over her, broken only by sharp moments of clarity that felt like knife wounds. The convent itself had been thoroughly ransacked. After that first terrible night, more soldiers had come in waves, each group finding some overlooked corner to strip bare, some new indignity to inflict. They had taken the food stores, the blankets, even the nuns' spare habits. They had defecated in the chapel, scrawled crude Latin phrases on walls that had been painted with prayers. One group had tried to set fire to the dormitory, but gave up when the stone refused to catch. Now, on the 4th morning after the breach, an eerie quiet had settled. The initial frenzy of violence had exhausted itself, and what remained was a city in shock, trying to comprehend what had been done to it. "Sister Theodora." Maria's voice was soft, careful not to startle. "The abbess, we need to bury her, but the ground is too hard, and we have no proper tools." Theodora turned from the window. Of their 16 nuns, 14 had survived the initial assault. Sister Eupraxia had died 2 days ago, her aged heart simply stopping during the night, perhaps a mercy, perhaps an escape her body chose for her. Another nun, Sister Joanna, had walked out of the convent on the 3rd day and not returned. No one had gone to look for her. They all understood. That left 12, and of those 12 only half were capable of basic functioning. The others sat in corners, sometimes weeping, sometimes silent, locked in places inside themselves where no one could reach them. "There's a small courtyard behind the kitchen," Theodora said. "The earth is softer there where the rain collects. We'll bury them both there, together." "Without a priest?" Maria asked. "Show me a priest who's still alive and willing to come here, and I'll wait for him," Theodora replied, her voice harder than she intended. She softened it. "We'll do what we can, Maria. God will understand. And if he doesn't, then perhaps we're better off without his understanding." Maria's eyes widened at the blasphemy, but she said nothing. What could she say? They had all prayed fervently during those first hours, begging for deliverance, for mercy, for divine intervention. Their prayers had been met with laughter and violence from men wearing the cross of Christ. They buried Abbess Irene and Sister Eupraxia that afternoon, using broken pieces of furniture as makeshift shovels, taking turns digging until their hands bled. 6 nuns were strong enough to help. The others watched from windows or didn't watch at all. Theodora spoke the prayers from memory, her voice steady despite the grief that threatened to choke her. May her memory be eternal. May she find peace in the arms of the Theotokos. May God grant her rest in the place where there is no pain, no sorrow, no suffering. As she spoke those ancient words, she wondered if she believed them anymore. Where was God when Irene's skull cracked against the altar step? Where was the Theotokos when young Anna was dragged screaming across the chapel floor? But she finished the prayers because the other nuns needed to hear them, needed some thread of continuity with the life they had known before the world ended. After the burial, they gathered in what remained of the refectory, a room stripped of furniture, but at least structurally intact. 12 women sitting on the floor because there was nowhere else to sit, looking to Theodora with varying degrees of hope and desperation. "We need to make decisions," Theodora began. She had not wanted this leadership, had never aspired to it, but Irene was dead and someone had to speak. "First, we need food. The soldiers took everything edible. We have perhaps 2 days of water from the cistern, maybe 3 if we're careful. The markets will be looted, Maria said. There's nothing left in the city to buy. Then we find what we can. Forage. Beg if we must. Theodora looked around the circle. Those who are strong enough will come with me. We'll search the abandoned houses nearby, see if anyone left food behind when they fled. Sister Helena, who at 32 had been the convent's best gardener before the siege, spoke up. The vegetable plots are destroyed. They drove horses through them. For sport, I think. But there might be root vegetables still in the ground, onions, turnips, things they wouldn't have bothered with. Good, Theodora said. Helena, take whoever you need. Dig up what you can find. And the younger sisters? Asked Sister Fatini, one of the few who had emerged from the trauma still relatively functional. Anna hasn't spoken since the first night. Neither has Marcia or Eugenia. They just sit and stare. Theodora's chest tightened. We keep them safe. We keep them fed. We give them time. That's all we can do. Time for what? Fatini's voice cracked. Time to accept what was done to us? Time to pretend we can ever be whole again? Time to survive, Theodora said firmly. That's all I'm promising. We survive today, then we survive tomorrow, and we keep surviving until we figure out what comes after that. It was a pathetically small goal, but it was all she had to offer. The expedition to search for food proved both easier and harder than Theodora had feared. Easier because they found 3 houses within 2 streets that had been abandoned, their inhabitants fled or dead, and had not yet been completely stripped by looters. Harder because in searching those houses, they found evidence of what had happened to their owners. In one house, a family of 5 lay in the kitchen, throats cut, including 2 children who couldn't have been older than 6 and 8. In another, they found a man who had hanged himself from the rafters, a crude note in Greek pinned to his chest. Better this than watch them defile my wife again. Theodora forced herself to keep moving, to focus on the task. They found half a sack of barley, some dried fish that had been overlooked, a basket of apples going soft but still edible. They took a cooking pot, some wooden bowls, a knife that had fallen behind a broken cabinet. As they worked, other survivors emerged from hiding places. An elderly Greek man, his arm badly burned, asked if they had seen his granddaughter. A woman covered in bruises clutched a baby and begged them for water. A group of young men, wild-eyed and desperate, demanded to know if the nuns had any weapons. Theodora had no answers for any of them. The city had become a nightmare landscape where the social order had completely collapsed, where the only law was the strength to take what you needed and the luck to avoid those stronger than you. They made it back to the convent by nightfall, exhausted and heartsick. The food they had gathered would last perhaps a week if they rationed carefully. After that, she had no idea. That night, Theodora sat in the ruined chapel, unable to sleep. The icons were gone, the silver stripped from every surface, but the walls still stood, and that had to mean something. She traced her fingers along the scarred plaster where the Theotokos had hung, feeling the jagged edges where the Crusaders had pried her loose. I don't know if you can hear me, she whispered to the empty air. I don't know if you're listening or if you ever were, but I need help. These women need help. We need to know what to do, how to keep going. We need something. The silence that answered was absolute. Behind her, footsteps. Theodora turned to find Anna standing in the doorway, her face ghostly pale in the moonlight that streamed through the broken windows. Sister Anna, Theodora said gently, you should be resting. For the first time in 4 days, Anna spoke. I can't rest. When I close my eyes, I see them. I think it would be easier to die. And Theodora felt her heart break. She stood and crossed to the girl, taking her cold hands. I know. God help me, I know exactly what you mean. But listen to me, Anna. They took much from us, but they didn't take everything. We're still here, we're still breathing, and as long as we're alive, we have the power to decide who we become after this. Who could I become? Anna's voice was raw. I was going to be a bride of Christ. You're devoted, serving God all my days. Now You're a survivor, Theodora said fiercely. You're someone who endured the unendurable and lived. That takes a strength those men will never have, can never understand. Do you hear me, Anna? You are stronger than every one of them. Anna's face crumpled, and she collapsed into Theodora's arms, sobbing. Theodora held her, rocking slightly, making the small, soothing sounds one makes to a frightened child. She didn't know if her words were true. She didn't know if strength could be built from ashes and trauma, but she knew Anna needed to hear them, needed something to hold on to besides despair. They stayed like that for a long time, two women holding each other in a desecrated chapel, while outside the dying city tried to remember what peace had felt like. Over the following weeks, a grim routine established itself. The Latin Crusaders, having gorged themselves on plunder, began the process of organizing their occupation. They installed Baldwin of Flanders as the new emperor of what they now called the Latin Empire of Constantinople. The Byzantine nobility who survived fled to Nicaea and Trebizond, establishing rival governments in exile. The common people of Constantinople, those who hadn't been killed or enslaved, learned to navigate this new reality. For the nuns of the Theotokos Pamakaristos, survival meant adaptation. Theodora organized them into work groups. Some foraged for food in the ruins, others tended the damaged vegetable plots, coaxing life from the trampled earth. Sister Maria established a small infirmary in one of the ground floor rooms, treating injuries for any who came seeking help, Greek refugees mostly, but occasionally even a crusader soldier would appear at their gate, shamefaced, clutching a wound that needed cleaning. "Why do we help them?" Fatini demanded one day after they had treated a Flemish soldier's infected arm. "They destroyed us. They destroyed everything. Why waste our supplies on them?" "Because," Theodora said wearily, "if we let ourselves become like them, cruel, indifferent to suffering, then they've won. They've taken more than our home and our safety. They've taken who we are." It was an argument she had with herself daily. Some part of her wanted vengeance, wanted to see every crusader suffer as they had made her sisters suffer. But a larger part knew that path led only to more darkness, and there was already too much darkness in the world. Slowly, painfully, some of the nuns began to heal. Anna started speaking in full sentences, though she startled at sudden noises and would not go outside after dark. Sister Helena threw herself into the garden work with desperate intensity, as if she could dig herself out of her trauma through sheer physical effort. Others remained broken, lost in interior worlds from which they might never fully emerge. 2 months after the sack, a knock came at the gate, not the pounding of soldiers, but a tentative, almost apologetic tap. Theodora, who now wore a knife concealed in her habit, approached cautiously. A man stood there, a Latin crusader by his equipment, but his bearing was different from the drunken soldiers they had encountered before. He was perhaps 35, his face weathered and marked with old scars. Most notably, he was alone, and his hands were empty, his weapons sheathed. "I speak some Greek," he said haltingly, his accent terrible. "I wish to speak with whoever leads here." "I lead here," Theodora said coldly. "What do you want?" The man looked uncomfortable. "My name is Philippe de Marseille. I'm a knight in service to Count Hugh of St. Paul. I come because—" He struggled for words. "Because I wish to ask forgiveness." Theodora stared at him. "Forgiveness? I was part of the army that took this city. I did not," and he swallowed hard. "I did not personally harm women of the church, but I did nothing to stop it either. I stood by and let it happen, and that makes me complicit. I cannot undo what was done, but I can offer what help I'm able to give now. Why? Theodora demanded. Why do you care? You got what you wanted. The city is yours. Philippe's face twisted with an emotion she couldn't quite read. Shame, perhaps, or grief. Because this isn't what I wanted. When I took the cross, I believed we were serving God, liberating the Holy Land. Instead, we sacked a Christian city and committed acts that will damn us all. I can't fix that, but I can try to help the people we hurt. Theodora wanted to spit in his face, to curse him and everything he represented. But she thought of their dwindling supplies, the approaching winter, the vulnerability of 12 women alone in a destroyed city. You want to help? She said. Then bring us food. Not once, but regularly. Grain, oil, whatever you can spare from your ill-gotten gains. Bring us wood for the winter. Help us repair the roof before the rains come. Do that, and perhaps your soul will be slightly less black than those of your fellows. Philippe nodded. I will. I swear it on the cross I no longer deserve to wear. He was true to his word. 3 days later, he returned with a cart laden with supplies. Barley, dried meat, olive oil, a bolt of cloth suitable for making new habits. Over the following weeks, he came regularly, sometimes bringing materials, sometimes bringing news of the city's reorganization under Latin rule. The other nuns didn't know what to make of him. Some, like Fortini, refused to speak to him at all. Others, like Maria, were cautiously grateful for the assistance. Anna would hide whenever he came, unable to bear the sight of a crusader's surcoat. Theodora herself was torn. Philippe seemed genuinely remorseful, and his help was invaluable. But every time she saw him, she thought of Abbess Irene's blood spreading across the chapel floor, of the laughter of men wearing the same red cross he wore. One afternoon in June, as Philippe helped repair a section of the courtyard wall, Theodora finally asked the question that had been burning in her mind. Why did you do it? You, specifically. Why did you stand by and watch while your brothers committed atrocities? Philippe set down the stone he had been fitting into place. His hands, she noticed, were shaking slightly. Because I was afraid. Because I told myself it wasn't my place to interfere. Because I convinced myself that orders were orders, and the Greeks must have done something to deserve this. He looked at her directly. These are all lies I told myself to avoid responsibility. The truth is simpler and more damning. I did it because it was easier than standing up to men I considered my friends and brothers in arms. And now I have no friends. Now I see their faces everywhere, hear their screams. Now I understand that there are some things you cannot come back from, some lines that once crossed change who you are forever. He picked up the stone again, fitting it carefully into the wall. I cannot make this right, but I can at least make it less wrong. It wasn't enough. It would never be enough, but it was something, and in the ruins of Constantinople, something was often all you could hope for. As summer gave way to autumn, the city slowly, painfully, began to resemble a functioning place again. The Latin rulers established markets, imposed curfews, tried to create order from chaos. The Greek population, those who remained, learned to live under foreign occupation, their ancient empire reduced to a subject territory, and in the convent of the Theotokos Pamakaristos, 12 women continued the work of surviving. They were not the same women they had been before April 12th, 1204. Those women had died with Abbess Irene, had been murdered along with the city's innocents, but they were still here, still breathing, still moving forward, one painful day at a time. Theodora often thought of Irene's last words, "Protect them." She had tried. She had failed in so many ways, but she kept trying because the alternative was surrender, and surrender meant the men who had destroyed them would have won completely. Late one night, unable to sleep, she returned to the ruined chapel. Someone, she suspected Anna, had placed wildflowers where the icon of the Theotokos had hung. It was a small gesture, an attempt to bring beauty back to a space that had been so thoroughly profaned. Theodora knelt on the floor, her knees finding the familiar worn spots in the stone. She didn't pray exactly, she didn't have words for that anymore. But she sat in the silence, in the presence of something larger than herself. Whether God or simply the weight of history, she couldn't say. "We're still here," she whispered to the empty air, to the absent icon, to whatever might be listening. "You tried to break us, but we're still here." Outside, the wind picked up, carrying with it the scent of the sea and the sound of the city, wounded but enduring. Inside, in the darkness of the chapel, Theodora allowed herself to believe just for a moment that endurance might be enough. Winter descended on Constantinople with unusual ferocity. By December 1204, snow blanketed the ruined city, covering the scars of the sack beneath a deceptive white purity. But beneath that pristine surface, the wounds festered. Theodora stood in the convent's small garden, now barren except for the frost-resistant kale that Sister Helena had insisted on planting. The older nun had been right. Those hardy plants were now one of their few reliable food sources. Helena herself worked nearby, her breath misting in the cold air as she harvested leaves with careful efficiency. "The soil is exhausted," Helena said without looking up. "We've pushed it too hard, trying to grow enough to feed us all. Next spring, we'll need to let some plots rest, maybe find manure somewhere to replenish it." Theodora nodded, pulling her threadbare cloak tighter. Their habits had been reduced to patches upon patches. The cloth Philippe brought them barely sufficient to keep ahead of the wear. "We'll manage. We always do." It had become her refrain, repeated so often she almost believed it. They would manage. They would survive. One day at a time, one crisis at a time, they would continue. But the cost of that survival was beginning to show in ways that troubled her deeply. Sister Fotini had left 3 weeks ago, simply walking out the gate one morning and not returning. She had left a note, written in shaky Greek on a scrap of cloth. "I cannot do this anymore. Forgive me." Theodora had sent Helena to search the nearby streets, but they had found no trace. Whether Fotini had fled the city entirely, found refuge elsewhere, or met a darker fate, they would likely never know. They were down to 11 nuns now. 11 women trying to maintain the semblance of a religious community in the ruins of their former life. That afternoon, Maria came to find Theodora in the scriptorium. The one room they had managed to restore to something approaching its former function, though they had no materials for illumination work anymore. Theodora now spent her time there copying medical texts at Maria's request, preserving knowledge that might otherwise be lost. "We have a visitor," Maria said quietly. "A woman, Greek. She's asking for sanctuary." Theodora set down her quill. They had taken in refugees before, but space and resources were limited. "What are her circumstances?" "She won't say, but she has bruises, recent ones, and she's terrified. I think she's running from someone." They found the woman huddled in the refectory, wrapped in a cloak that had once been fine but was now mud-stained and torn. She was perhaps 25, with dark hair and eyes that darted nervously to every sound. When Theodora entered, the woman flinched. "Peace," Theodora said gently, sitting down across from her. "I am Sister Theodora. This is a safe place. No one will harm you here." The woman's laugh was bitter. "Is anywhere safe now?" "Safe enough," Theodora replied. "Tell me your name." "Ekaterine." The woman pulled her cloak tighter. "I was a widow. My husband died in the fighting when the walls were breached. After that, I did what I had to do to survive." She didn't elaborate, but she didn't need to. Theodora understood. Many women in the occupied city had been forced into arrangements they would never have considered before, selling themselves to Latin soldiers for food, for protection, for any scrap of security in a world turned upside down. "And now?" Theodora prompted. "Now the man who was keeping me has tired of me. He wants someone younger, less damaged. He told me to leave, but his friends—" Ekaterine's voice broke. "They said they would share me among themselves, as a common thing. I ran. I didn't know where else to go." Theodora exchanged a look with Maria. They were barely feeding themselves. Taking on another mouth would strain their resources even further. But what was the alternative? Send the woman back to face a fate that Theodora herself knew too intimately. "You can stay," Theodora said. "We have little, but what we have, we share. You'll work like everyone else, in the garden, in the kitchen, wherever you're needed, and you'll respect the rules of this community. Can you do that?" Ekaterine's eyes filled with tears. "Yes, thank you. I'll do anything. I'll work until my hands bleed, I promise." Over the following days, Ekaterine proved true to her word. She worked tirelessly, taking on the hardest tasks without complaint. But her presence created tension Theodora hadn't anticipated. Some of the nuns, particularly the younger ones who had been novices before the sack, struggled with Ekaterine's past. They whispered among themselves about fallen women and sin, conveniently forgetting that they themselves had been violated against their will, as if innocence could be measured in degrees of consent. It came to a head one evening during their communal meal, a thin soup of kale and barley that barely qualified as food. Sister Anna, who had been making steady progress in her recovery, suddenly stood up and pointed at Ekaterine. "She shouldn't be here," Anna said, her voice shaking. "This is a convent, a holy place. She's a whore. She chose that life." The words hung in the air like a curse. Ekaterine's face went white, then red. She set down her bowl with trembling hands. Theodora felt her own anger rising, hot and sharp. "Sit down, Anna." "No!" Anna's voice rose. "We've sacrificed everything to remain pure, to honor our vows, and you let her pollute this place with her presence." "Enough!" Theodora's shout echoed off the walls, surprising everyone, including herself. She stood, facing Anna across the table. "You want to talk about purity, about honor. Our vows were violated by men claiming to serve Christ. Our bodies were defiled in the very chapel where we worshipped. None of us had a choice in that. But Ekaterine," she gestured to the trembling woman, "she at least had the courage to make decisions that kept her alive. She survived the only way she could, in a city that gave women no good options. If you want to judge her for that, then you must judge all of us for every compromise we've made to survive." Anna's face crumpled. "It's not the same, isn't it?" Theodora asked more softly. "When I accepted food from Philippe, a man who stood by while his brothers committed atrocities, was that not a compromise? When we bartered herbs from our garden to a Venetian merchant for lamp oil, knowing he likely stole those coins from Greek homes, was that not cooperating with our oppressors? We are all trying to survive in a world that offers us no good choices. The only difference is in how we judge each other for it." She sat back down, suddenly exhausted. "Ekaterine stays. Anyone who cannot accept that is free to leave, though I would grieve to see you go." No one moved. Anna slowly sank back onto her seat, tears streaming down her face. Ekaterine kept her eyes fixed on her bowl, her shoulders hunched as if waiting for another blow. That night, Theodora found Anna in the chapel, kneeling before the empty space where the icon had been. The girl was crying, great racking sobs that shook her whole body. Theodora sat beside her, saying nothing, just offering presence. Finally, Anna spoke. "I'm so angry. All the time I'm so angry. At them, at God, at myself. And I don't know what to do with it. So I lash out at whoever is nearby, and that's not fair. But I can't stop." "Anger is appropriate," Theodora said quietly. "What was done to us deserves anger. But Anna, you cannot let that anger consume you. I've watched it destroy women, turn them into bitter shells of themselves. You deserve better than that." "What else is there?" Anna asked hopelessly. "How do I stop being angry? How do I forgive?" "I don't know if forgiveness is possible," Theodora admitted. "Maybe it isn't. Not for something like this. But perhaps we can work towards something else. Acceptance, maybe. Accepting that this happened, that we survived it, and that we get to choose who we become after it." "I don't know who to become," Anna whispered. "Neither do I," Theodora said. "So we'll figure it out together." They sat in silence for a while, two women in a ruined chapel, searching for a way forward through the darkness. Philippe continued to visit regularly, bringing supplies and news from the Latin quarter of the city. The occupation had settled into a permanent arrangement. Baldwin of Flanders ruled as emperor, the Venetians controlled the harbour and much of the trade, and the native Greek population existed as second-class citizens in their own city. One cold January afternoon, Philippe arrived with more than supplies. He brought a warning. "There are rumours," he said to Theodora, his face grave. "Some of the Crusaders, men with no official position but too much time and anger, are talking about purging the city of Orthodox institutions. They claim that Greek monasteries and convents are centres of rebellion, places where resistance is being organised." Theodora felt ice in her stomach. "Is there any truth to that?" "I doubt it," Philippe said. "But truth doesn't matter when men want an excuse for violence. Sister Theodora, you should know that your convent has been mentioned specifically. There's a man, Henri de Champagne, who claims you harbour fugitives and refuse to acknowledge Latin authority." "We harbour refugees," Theodora said, "women with nowhere else to go, and we acknowledge no authority but God's, which I would think a crusader could understand." "I'm not arguing with you," Philippe said patiently. "I'm warning you. Henri has friends, violent men with a taste for destruction. If they decide to make an example of you, there won't be much I can do to stop them." "Then what do you suggest?" Theodora asked, though she already knew she wouldn't like the answer. "Leave the city, take your women and go to one of the Greek territories. Nicaea is accepting refugees. You could start again there, rebuild." Theodora shook her head. "This is our home. This convent has stood for over 100 years. We won't be driven out." "Pride," Philippe said, "is a luxury you can't afford." "It's not pride," Theodora replied. "It's principle. If we run every time they threaten us, we'll spend our whole lives running. At some point you have to stand your ground." Philippa looked at her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "Then at least let me help you prepare. Reinforce the gates. Create hiding places for the women and your supplies. Be ready to defend yourselves if necessary." Over the following weeks, they did exactly that. Philippe brought timber to reinforce the gates and showed them how to bar the doors from inside. They created a hidden chamber beneath the refectory, accessed through a trapdoor concealed under a heavy table. It wasn't large enough for everyone, but it could hold the youngest and most vulnerable in an emergency. Theodora also made a decision that troubled her conscience, but seemed necessary for survival. She asked Philippe to teach her and the other nuns basic self-defense. "I took vows of peace," she told him. "I promised to turn the other cheek, to respond to violence with prayer. But I cannot stand by and watch my sisters harmed again. I won't." Philippe arranged for them to train in the early mornings when few people were about. He taught them how to use knives, how to aim for vulnerable points, how to fight dirty and escape. It felt like a betrayal of everything Theodora had once believed, but those beliefs had been forged in a world that no longer existed. Sister Helena proved surprisingly adept with a blade. "My father was a soldier," she explained, practicing her grip. "He taught me some things before I took the veil. I'd hoped never to use them." Even gentle Maria learned the basics, though her face was troubled throughout. "This feels wrong," she confessed to Theodora. "We're supposed to heal, not harm." "We're supposed to survive," Theodora replied. "Everything else is secondary." She wasn't sure when she had become so pragmatic, so willing to compromise the ideals she had held sacred. Perhaps it had been gradual, each small concession leading to the next. Or perhaps it had happened all at once, on that terrible April night when the world revealed its true face. Either way, she could not go back. She could only move forward, carrying the weight of her choices and hoping they would be enough. In February, the threatened attack came, but not in the way they expected. It was a cold evening, the kind where the wind cut through every layer of clothing. Theodora was in the refectory, discussing food rationing with Maria, when they heard shouting from the courtyard. They rushed outside to find 3 Latin soldiers at the gate, demanding entry. These were not the relatively disciplined crusaders who served under the official leadership. These were rougher men, mercenaries or common soldiers, drunk and belligerent. "Open up!" one of them shouted, pounding on the reinforced gate. "We know you're hiding fugitives!" Harboring enemies of the Latin Empire, Theodora positioned herself on the wall above the gate, where she could be seen and heard. "This is a religious house. We harbor no one but women seeking safety. Leave us in peace." "Peace?" The soldier laughed. "Greek whores don't get peace. Open the gate or we'll break it down." Behind her, Theodora heard the other nuns gathering. She felt Helena's presence at her shoulder, the older woman's hand resting on the knife they now all carried. "If you break down this gate," Theodora called out, her voice steady despite her racing heart, "you will have to answer to Knight Philippe de Marseille, who has placed this convent under his protection. He serves Count Hugh of St. Pol, and I doubt your commanders would appreciate common soldiers causing diplomatic incidents." It was a bluff. Philippe had no official authority to protect them. But the soldiers didn't know that, and the mention of noble names made them hesitate. "We'll be back," the leader finally growled, "and next time we'll bring enough men that your night won't matter." They left, but Theodora knew it was only a reprieve. The threat hadn't been eliminated, only postponed. That night, she gathered all the nuns for a meeting. It was time to face the reality they had been avoiding. "We cannot stay here much longer," she said, the words tasting like ash in her mouth. "Not safely. Those men will return, and next time they'll bring others. We need to consider alternatives." "You said we wouldn't run," Anna said. There was no accusation in her tone, only exhaustion. "You said we'd stand our ground." "I was wrong," Theodora admitted. "Standing our ground means dying on it, and I'm not ready to make that choice for all of us. But I won't force anyone to leave. Those who wish to stay, we'll do our best to protect you. Those who wish to go, I'll help you find safe passage to Nicaea or elsewhere." The discussion lasted late into the night. In the end, they decided on a compromise. The youngest nuns and the most traumatized would leave for Nicaea with the spring caravans. The others, 8 women including Theodora, would remain, maintaining the convent as long as they could, a defiant presence in the occupied city. It wasn't a perfect solution, but in Constantinople in the winter of 1205, perfect solutions didn't exist. They had only the choices they could live with, and the hope that those choices would be enough to see them through to another day. As Theodora lay in her narrow bed that night, listening to the wind howl through the broken shutters, she thought about the woman she had been before the sack. That woman had believed in clear moral lines, in the power of faith, in a just God who rewarded virtue. That woman was dead. In her place was someone harder, someone who carried a knife and knew how to use it, someone who made brutal calculations about survival and accepted compromises that would have horrified her former self. She didn't know if this new version of herself was better or worse. She only knew it was what remained, what had been forged in the fires of that terrible April and the months that followed. And if that made her something other than the nun she had vowed to be, then so be it. She had learned the hard way that vows, like walls, meant nothing when the world decided to tear them down. All you could do was rebuild with whatever materials you had left, and hope the structure would hold long enough to matter. Spring came slowly to Constantinople, the warmth tentative, as if the season itself was uncertain whether renewal was possible in such wounded ground. By March 1205, nearly a year had passed since the sack, and the city bore its scars like a veteran of countless battles, functional but forever changed. Theodora stood in the courtyard, watching Sister Helena prepare the garden plots for planting. They had managed to acquire seeds through Philippe's connections, turnips, onions, beans, some herbs for Maria's infirmary. It wasn't much, but it was something. Always their lives had been reduced to a series of somethings, small victories against the vast weight of loss. 4 of their number had left for Nicaea 2 weeks earlier, including Sister Anna. Theodora had embraced the young woman at the gate, feeling the sharp angles of her shoulders through the worn habit, seeing the haunted look that still lingered in her eyes. "Will you come later?" Anna had asked. After whatever you need to do here is finished." Theodora had no answer. She didn't know if there would be an after or what form it might take. "Perhaps," she had said, "if God wills it." Anna's smile had been sad. "You don't believe that anymore, do you? That God wills anything?" "I don't know what I believe," Theodora admitted, "but I know I believe in you, Anna. You're stronger than you think. You'll build a good life in Nicaea." Now they were 8 women maintaining a convent that had once housed 16, keeping alive a community that probably should have died with Abbess Irene. Theodora often wondered if they were being brave or simply stubborn, clinging to something because letting go would mean admitting the totality of their defeat. Philippe arrived at midday, as he often did, bringing supplies and news. But today his face was troubled in a way that immediately put Theodora on edge. "What's happened?" she asked as they walked toward the refectory, out of earshot of the others. "The Latin Empire is fragmenting," Philippe said quietly. "Baldwin is losing control. The Greek nobles in exile are organizing resistance, and there are rumors of Bulgarian armies marching on the city. The Crusaders are arguing among themselves about who gets what territory, what share of the plunder. It's chaos." "More chaos than we already have?" Theodora asked dryly. "Different chaos. Dangerous chaos." Philippe stopped walking, turning to face her. "Sister Theodora, you need to understand. When empires fall, the people on the margins suffer most. Religious communities, especially Greek Orthodox ones that never accepted Latin authority, will be targeted by everyone. The Latins will see you as potential Greek sympathizers. The Greeks will resent that you've survived while others perished. You're in an impossible position." Theodora crossed her arms. "We've been in an impossible position for nearly a year. What's changed?" "The illusion of stability has shattered," Philippe said. "Before, there was at least the pretense of order, of occupation following certain rules. That's ending. What comes next will be worse." "What do you suggest?" Philippa hesitated. "There's a man I want you to meet. His name is Alexios Laskaris. He's a Greek nobleman, cousin to Theodore Laskaris, who's setting up the government in exile in Nicaea. Alexios stayed in Constantinople to organize a network, helping refugees escape, smuggling supplies to Greek families, gathering intelligence on Latin military movements." Theodora felt her pulse quicken. "You're saying he's part of the resistance?" "I'm saying he's trying to help his people survive. He's asked to meet with you." "Why would a Greek resistance leader want to meet with me? And why would you, a Latin crusader, help arrange such a meeting?" Philippe's expression was complex. Shame, determination, something that might have been hope. "Because I'm trying to atone for what we did. Because I think survival in this city will require Greeks and Latins who are willing to look past the uniforms and see the humans underneath. And because Alexios believes you and your nuns might be valuable allies." "Allies in what?" "In surviving what comes next. In maybe, if we're very lucky, building something better from these ruins." Theodora studied Philippe's face. Over the past months, she had come to trust him, or at least trust that his remorse was genuine. But this felt different, more dangerous. Associating with Greek resistance would make them explicit targets. Yet, what was the alternative? Remain neutral in a city where neutrality was impossible. Wait passively for whatever catastrophe Philippe predicted. "When does he want to meet?" she asked. Relief flooded Philippe's face. "Tonight. There's an abandoned warehouse near the harbor, formerly used by Greek silk merchants. It's neutral ground. Neither Greek nor Latin controls it. I'll take you there. I'll bring Maria, Theodora said, and Helena. I won't go alone. Philippe nodded. Fair enough, but Sister Theodora, be careful what you commit to. These are complicated times, and the wrong alliance could destroy you. That evening, as twilight painted Constantinople in shades of grey and gold, Theodora, Maria, and Helena followed Philippe through the city streets. They wore simple cloaks over their habits, trying to appear as ordinary citizens rather than religious women. The city at dusk had a furtive quality, everyone moving quickly, eyes downcast, avoiding attention. The warehouse was exactly as Philippe had described, abandoned, partially burned, its walls marked with the evidence of the sack. They entered through a side door that hung askew on broken hinges. Inside, the vast space was dark except for a small circle of lamplight in the center, where 3 figures waited. One stepped forward as they approached, a man in his early 30s, wearing the remnants of Byzantine noble dress, adapted for functionality rather than display. His face was lean, intelligent, marked with a scar along his jawline that looked relatively fresh. Sister Theodora, he said in flawless Greek. Thank you for coming. I am Alexios Laskaris. Theodora inclined her head. You know who I am. Tell me why I'm here. Alexios smiled slightly. Direct. I appreciate that. You're here because you represent something rare in Constantinople right now, an Orthodox community that has survived with some autonomy, maintained its identity, and demonstrated both resilience and adaptability. These qualities make you valuable. Valuable how? My network needs safe houses, Alexios said. Places to shelter people moving through the city, to hide supplies, to meet without attracting Latin attention. Your convent could serve that purpose. Theodora felt Maria tense beside her. You want us to harbor fugitives and store contraband. That would put every woman in our community at risk. You're already at risk, Alexios countered. The Latin occupation is unstable. When it collapses, and it will collapse, there will be a reckoning. Those who collaborated will face Greek justice. Those who resisted will be remembered. You need to choose which side of that ledger you want to be on. We don't collaborate, Theodora said sharply. We survive. There's a difference. Is there? Alexios asked. You accept supplies from a Latin knight. You treat Latin soldiers in your infirmary. From where I stand, that looks like collaboration. Theodora felt her anger rising. From where you stand, safe in your network with your noble connections, it's easy to judge. We're 8 women trying to keep a convent alive. Every decision we make is about survival, not politics. Everything is politics now, Alexios said. There's no neutral ground anymore, sister. You can either help us build resistance to the occupation, or you can passively accept Latin rule. But don't pretend there's a third option where you're somehow above the conflict. Helena spoke up, her voice calm but firm. And if we help you, what exactly would you ask of us? Alexios turned his attention to her. Safe passage for refugees moving to Nicaea. Storage for supplies, mostly food and medicine, nothing overtly military. Occasionally, meeting space for members of my network. In return, we would provide protection, supplies, and when the Latin Empire falls, acknowledgement of your service. Protection from whom? Maria asked. Your people or the Latins? Both, ideally, Alexios said. Though I admit my ability to protect you from Latin violence is limited, who had remained silent throughout the exchange. You support this? Philippe met her eyes. I think, he said carefully, that the Latin occupation is doomed. We overreached. We've made too many enemies, and we lack the resources to hold what we've taken. When it ends, whether through Greek reconquest or Bulgarian invasion or simple collapse, you'll need friends among whoever comes next. Alexios can be that friend. Or he can get us all killed, Theodora said. That's also possible, Philippe admitted. But doing nothing is also a choice, and it has its own risks. Theodora was quiet for a long moment, thinking. She thought of Abbess Irene, who had always counseled caution and prayer. She thought of the younger nuns who had left for Nicaea, seeking safety and distance. She thought of the 8 women still depending on her leadership, who had already survived so much. "I need guarantees," she finally said. "If we do this, and I'm not saying we will, but if we do, I need certain things. First, no weapons stored in the convent. I won't have our home turned into an armory. Second, any refugees we shelter must be women, children, or elderly. No young men who might be fighters. Third, we maintain complete discretion about who knows of our arrangement. If word gets out, we're all dead." Alexios considered, then nodded. "Acceptable. With one addition. Occasionally, we may need to shelter someone who doesn't fit your categories, but only in emergencies, and never for more than a night." Define emergency. Someone about to be captured and tortured for information that could expose the entire network. Theodora exchanged glances with Maria and Helena. Both women gave small nods. "Very well," Theodora said. "We'll try this. But understand, the moment it threatens my women's safety, we're done. I won't sacrifice them for your resistance." "Fair enough," Alexios said, extending his hand. After a moment's hesitation, Theodora shook it. As they walked back through the darkening streets, Maria voiced the concern Theodora knew they all shared. "Are we sure about this? We've just made ourselves targets of both sides." "We were already targets," Theodora said. "At least now we might have allies when it matters. Or enemies," Helena murmured. "Time will tell which." The partnership with Alexios's network began slowly. The first refugee they sheltered was an elderly woman whose family had been killed by drunken soldiers. She stayed 3 days in the hidden chamber below the refectory, then moved on toward Nicaea with papers Alexios provided. The second was a young mother with 2 children, fleeing a Latin merchant who had purchased her from a soldier. They stayed a week while Alexios arranged safe passage. Each time, Theodora felt her nerves stretch tighter, waiting for the knock on the gate that would reveal their activities. But weeks passed, then months, and the arrangement held. In May, Alexios brought news that made Theodora's blood run cold. "The Bulgarians are coming. Tsar Kaloyan has allied with the Greeks against the Latins. There's going to be a massive battle, probably near Adrianople. If Baldwin loses, and intelligence suggests he will, Constantinople will be vulnerable." "Vulnerable to whom?" Theodora asked. "The Bulgarians or the Greeks?" "Both. Everyone. It will be chaos." Alexios paused. "You should leave, all of you. Get to Nicaea while the routes are still open." Theodora shook her head. "We've invested too much in staying. We're not running now. Pride will get you killed." "It's not pride," Theodora said. I don't know what it is. Stubbornness, maybe. Or faith, though not the kind I used to have. Faith that if we abandon this place, we abandon the last piece of who we were before the sack, and I'm not ready to do that." Alexios studied her face. "You know that holding on to the past can be as dangerous as ignoring it. I'm not holding on to the past. I'm holding on to the possibility that the future might include something other than running and hiding." On April 15th, 1205, almost exactly 1 year after the sack, news reached Constantinople that Emperor Baldwin had been captured by the Bulgarians at the Battle of Adrianople. The Latin Empire's army had been crushed. The survivors limped back to the city in disorder, bringing tales of slaughter and chaos. The city convulsed with uncertainty. Latin soldiers prepared for siege, Greek citizens whispered about reconquest. Bulgarian scouts were spotted in the countryside. Everyone waited to see what would happen next. In the convent, Theodora gathered her nuns. "We may face attack from any direction," she said. "Latin soldiers looking to loot before fleeing. Greeks seeking vengeance, Bulgarians who see us as simply more Christians to rob. We need to be prepared for anything. That night, they sealed their most precious possessions, what few remained, in the hidden chamber. They stockpiled water and food. They reviewed their escape routes and their defensive plans. They waited. The attack, when it came, was not from the direction they expected. It was late evening, 3 days after news of Adrianople reached the city. Theodora was in the chapel, still barren of icons, but maintained as a prayer space, when Sister Helena burst in. "Latin soldiers at the gate, a whole unit! They're demanding entry!" Theodora's heart sank. This was it, the confrontation they had dreaded. She grabbed the knife she now carried constantly and moved to the wall above the gate, where she could see and be seen. Below stood at least 20 soldiers, fully armed, commanded by an officer Theodora didn't recognize. Behind them, she could see torches and the outline of more men in the street. "This convent is suspected of harboring Greek rebels," the officer shouted. "Open the gates, or we'll break them down." Theodora's mind raced. Had they been betrayed? Had someone in Alexios's network talked? She thought of the refugees hiding below, the damning evidence of their cooperation with the resistance. "We harbor no one but women of the faith," she called out, her voice steadier than she felt. "We are under the protection of Knight Philippe de Marseille." "Philippe de Marseille is under arrest for treason," the officer shouted back. "His protection means nothing. Open the gates." The world seemed to tilt. Philippe arrested. For treason. Because of them. Theodora looked back at the courtyard, where her 7 remaining nuns had gathered, faces pale in the torchlight. She thought of Abbess Irene, who had died protecting them. She thought of Anna and the others who had fled to Nicaea. She thought of every compromise, every hard choice, every day of survival, and she made one more choice. "We will not open these gates," she shouted. "If you want entry, you'll have to break them down. And I promise you, when you do, you'll find women who know how to defend themselves. We've survived your army once. We'll survive it again." The officer laughed, but it was an uncertain sound. He conferred with his men, pointing at the walls, clearly assessing their options. And then, from behind the Latin soldiers, came new voices, shouting in Greek, the clash of weapons. Theodora watched in amazement as chaos erupted in the street. Greek fighters, dozens of them, poured out of the surrounding buildings, attacking the Latin soldiers from behind. She recognized some of them from Alexios's network. The battle was brief and brutal. The Latins, surrounded and outnumbered, broke and ran. Several lay dead or wounded in the street. Alexios himself appeared at the gate, breathing hard, blood on his sword. "Open up," he called. "We need to get these wounded out of sight, and you need to leave, now. This entire quarter will be swarming with Latins within the hour." Theodora felt Maria's hand on her arm. "He's right. We have to go." Everything that happened next occurred in a blur. They grabbed what they could carry, food, medical supplies, the few precious items from the hidden chamber. They fled through a side gate, following Alexios's fighters through a maze of alleys and abandoned buildings. Behind them, Theodora heard the sound of the convent burning. The Latins had found it empty and set it ablaze in rage. She didn't look back. She couldn't. If she looked back, she would see the last physical remnant of her old life going up in flames, and she wasn't sure she could keep moving if she witnessed that. They reached a safe house in the Greek quarter just before dawn, a merchant's home whose owner had fled months ago. 40 people crowded into the space, fighters and refugees, and Theodora's nuns, all exhausted, all terrified. Alexios found Theodora in a corner of the kitchen, where she sat with her head in her hands. "I'm sorry about the convent," he said quietly. "We'll find you another place." "It's gone," Theodora said numbly. "Everything, the chapel, the garden, the rooms where we lived and worked. All gone." "Yes," Alexios said, "but you're alive. Your women are alive. Sometimes that's all you can save." Theodora looked up at him, tears finally breaking through the numbness. "Is it?" Is staying alive enough? What's the point of surviving if we lose everything that made life worth living? Alexios sat down beside her. You want an answer? I don't have one. I've asked myself the same question every day since the sack. Why keep fighting when everything is already lost? Why not just give up? And, Theodora asked, and I decided that the Latins don't get to define what my life means. They don't get to write the ending of my story. I'll keep fighting, keep surviving, keep helping others survive, because the alternative is letting them win completely. And I won't give them that satisfaction. Theodora thought about that for a long moment. Then she nodded slowly. What happened to Philippe? I don't know, Alexios admitted, but if he's in Latin custody on charges of treason, his prospects aren't good. I'm sorry. I know he was important to you. He was complicated, Theodora said. A good man trying to atone for terrible things, I hope. She stopped, not sure how to finish the sentence. I hope he finds whatever peace he's searching for. Around them, the safe house settled into an uneasy rest. People found corners to sleep, wrapped themselves in blankets, tried to forget for a few hours the nightmare their lives had become. Theodora sat awake, watching dawn light filter through the shuttered windows, listening to Maria's breathing beside her, feeling the weight of responsibility for the 7 women who had followed her into this new uncertainty. The convent was gone. Philippe was likely dead. They were fugitives in a city tearing itself apart, but they were alive. And tomorrow, somehow, they would continue, because that's what survival meant. Not triumph, not victory, not even safety. Just the stubborn insistence on facing another day, and another after that, until someday maybe the world stopped burning and they could begin to rebuild, if that day ever came. Theodora closed her eyes, but she didn't pray. She had given that up long ago. Instead, she simply made a promise to herself, to Abbess Irene's memory, to the women sleeping around her. We will survive this. Whatever it takes, however long it takes, we will survive. It was all she had left to hold on to. But for now, in this moment, it was enough. The summer of 1205 brought a strange, fragile peace to Constantinople. The Bulgarians, satisfied with their victory at Adrianople, withdrew to their own territories. The Latin Empire, weakened but not destroyed, maintained control of the city under Baldwin's brother Henry, who proved a more competent ruler. The Greek resistance, lacking the strength for direct assault, settled into a long-term strategy of attrition and harassment. And in this uncertain equilibrium, Theodora and her 7 remaining nuns tried to build something resembling a life. The safe house in the Greek quarter became their temporary home. Alexios had arranged it. The merchant who owned the building had died without heirs, and in the chaos of the occupation, no one had clear claim to it. It wasn't a convent, just a modest 3-story building with rooms for trade goods on the ground floor and living quarters above. But it had a roof, walls, and a small courtyard where Helena immediately began planning a garden. The soil is terrible, Helena muttered, crouching to examine the packed earth. But there's a cistern nearby, and if we can get manure, compost, we could grow kale, maybe some herbs, beans if we're lucky. Theodora watched her work, feeling a complicated mix of emotions. Helena's determination to create life from this barren space was admirable, even inspiring. But part of Theodora wondered if they were just repeating the same pattern, building something that would inevitably be torn down, planting seeds that might never be harvested. "What are we doing, Helena?" she asked quietly. The older woman looked up, dirt on her hands, sweat on her brow. "We're making a garden." "Is that enough?" Helena sat back on her heels, considering the question seriously. "I don't know, but it's what I know how to do, so I'm doing it. If that's not enough, well, you'll have to tell me what would be." Theodora had no answer. Over the following weeks, they established routines. Maria set up a small infirmary in one of the ground-floor rooms, treating refugees and Greeks who couldn't access Latin-controlled hospitals. Word spread quietly through the neighborhood, and soon they had a steady stream of patients, burns, wounds, illnesses of malnutrition and stress. Sister Ekaterine, who had fled with them from the convent, proved surprisingly skilled at managing their household. She organized their supplies, negotiated with merchants for food and materials, and generally kept things functioning. The other nuns, who had once judged her so harshly, now relied on her practical competence. Theodora herself tried to maintain some semblance of religious community. They prayed together, though the prayers felt hollow in her mouth. They read from the few texts they had managed to save. They observed the feast days and fasts, going through motions that had once held meaning, but she couldn't shake the feeling that they were playing at being nuns, performing a role in a play whose audience had left the theatre. One evening in July, Alexios visited with news. "I've learned what happened to Philippe de Marseille." Theodora's heart clenched. "Is he dead?" "No, exiled. They couldn't prove treason. He had friends among the nobility who defended him, but he's been expelled from Constantinople. Last report placed him on a ship bound for France." Theodora felt an unexpected pang of loss. Philippe had been her enemy, her unlikely ally, her window into the Latin world that had destroyed hers. And now he was gone, disappeared into the vast distance between Constantinople and France, probably never to be seen again. "Did he leave any message?" she asked. Alexios shook his head. "He left in chains, but one of my contacts who saw him go said he asked them to tell you—" He paused, as if trying to remember the exact words. "He said to tell you that some things are worth the price, and helping you was one of them." Theodora blinked back sudden tears. "Thank you for telling me." After Alexios left, she climbed to the building's flat roof, where she could see across the rooftops of Constantinople. The city sprawled before her in the evening light, still beautiful despite its scars, still magnificent despite its wounds. The Hagia Sophia's great dome dominated the skyline, its cross now Latin, but its bones still Byzantine. The sea beyond reflected the sunset in shades of gold and crimson. She thought about Philippe, sailing toward a home that probably held no welcome for a knight who had failed his crusade and been exiled in disgrace. She thought about the convent, reduced to ashes. She thought about the woman she had been 16 months ago, kneeling in the scriptorium, carefully applying gold leaf to a manuscript, believing the world was stable and ordered and just. That woman was dead. But what had replaced her? Sister Theodora? Maria had climbed the stairs to join her. "Are you well?" "I'm not sure," Theodora admitted. "I'm not sure I even know what well means anymore." Maria moved to stand beside her, looking out at the city. "I've been thinking about our vows. What about them? We promised poverty, chastity, obedience. Those were supposed to be the foundations of our lives. But poverty has become survival. Chastity was taken from us, and obedience—" Maria paused. "Who do we obey now? The abbess is dead. The church structure is fractured. We're on our own." "Are you saying our vows are meaningless?" Theodora asked. "I'm saying maybe we need new vows. Ones that reflect who we are now, not who we were before the sack." Theodora considered this. What would those vows be? "I don't know," Maria admitted, "but I know we're more than just survivors. We're healers, fighters, refuge providers. We're women who've seen the worst humanity can do and chose to remain human anyway. That has to count for something." "You're more philosophical than I gave you credit for," Theodora said with a slight smile. "Trauma does that to you," Maria replied dryly. "Makes you think about what really matters." That conversation stayed with Theodora over the following days. What did matter? What were they actually building here? In August, they received word that Anna and the others had safely reached Nicaea and were being integrated into a convent there. Theodora felt relief at the news, mixed with a complicated envy. Those women had escaped, had found safety and normalcy again. Meanwhile, she and her remaining nuns existed in this liminal space, not quite a religious community, not quite secular, something undefined and precarious. But perhaps, she thought, undefined meant unconstrained. Perhaps they could create something new, something that had never existed before. She called a meeting of all 7 nuns. They gathered in the largest room of the house, sitting in a circle as they once had in the convent's chapter house. "We need to make a decision," Theodora began. "We can continue as we are, pretending we're still the community we were before the sack, or we can acknowledge that we've become something different and decide consciously what we want that something to be." "What do you propose?" asked Sister Kaliniki, who at 68 was now their eldest. "I propose we redefine ourselves. Not as traditional nuns bound by old vows that the world has made impossible to keep, but as a community of women committed to serving others who suffer under occupation. We become healers, refuge providers, advocates for those with no voice. We maintain our spiritual practices because they give us strength, but we don't pretend that prayers alone are sufficient action." "That sounds more like a resistance organization than a religious community," Ekaterine observed. "Maybe it's both," Theodora said. "Maybe in times like these, faith and resistance are the same thing." They debated for hours. Some nuns worried they were abandoning their calling. Others embraced the new vision enthusiastically. In the end, they agreed to try Theodora's approach for 6 months and reassess. They called themselves the Sisters of Refuge, no longer claiming the old convent's name, but creating something new from its ashes. The work came quickly. Through Alexius's network, they became known as a safe place for those fleeing violence or persecution. They sheltered women leaving abusive situations. They hid Greek nobles hunted by Latin authorities. They treated injured resistance fighters while maintaining enough Latin contacts to avoid suspicion. It was dangerous work. Twice Latin patrols searched their building. Each time, they survived through a combination of hidden chambers, prepared lies, and sheer luck. Theodora knew their luck wouldn't hold forever, but she had stopped planning for forever. They planned for today, maybe tomorrow, and trusted that somehow they would navigate whatever came next. In October, on the anniversary of Abbess Irene's death, they held a memorial service. They had no priest, no formal liturgy, just 8 women gathered in their makeshift chapel, a cleared room with a simple wooden cross on the wall, speaking memories of the woman who had led them. "She would have been appalled by what we've become," Sister Kaliniki said with a slight smile. "She valued tradition, propriety, following established rules. We're breaking every rule she held sacred. But she also valued protecting her flock," Maria added. "Everything we do to protect those who need protection. I think she would understand that, even if she didn't approve of our methods." Theodora, leading the service, felt the weight of that responsibility. Irene had given her life trying to shield her nuns from violence. Now Theodora carried that mandate forward, but in ways Irene could never have imagined. "We honor her memory," Theodora said, "by surviving, by helping others survive, by refusing to let the violence that killed her define who we become. She died protecting us. We live by protecting others. That's the debt we owe her." As winter approached again, marking 18 months since the sack, Theodora took stock of what they had built. The Sisters of Refuge had helped over 100 people find safety. Maria's infirmary had treated countless patients. Helena's garden had provided food, not just for them, but for neighbors in need. Ekaterine's management had kept them supplied and functioning. It wasn't a traditional convent. It wasn't what any of them had expected their lives to become. But it was meaningful work, and it was saving lives. One cold December evening, Theodora sat in the courtyard, wrapped in a cloak, watching stars emerge in the clear sky above Constantinople. Helena joined her, bringing hot mint tea from the kitchen. "You look contemplative," Helena observed, handing her a cup. "I was thinking about my father," Theodora said. "He brought me to the convent 28 years ago because his business had failed and he couldn't afford to marry me off. I was 17, terrified, certain my life was over. And now? Now I understand he gave me a gift, though neither of us knew it. He gave me a community, a purpose, a way to become someone other than a merchant's disappointing daughter. And when that community was destroyed, I had the tools to build a new one." Helena smiled. "Your father would be proud." "I'm not sure about that," Theodora said. "I carry weapons. I harbor fugitives. I've become someone who chooses pragmatism over principle. That's not the daughter he raised, and it's certainly not the nun I vowed to be. But it's who you need to be," Helena said. "And who knows, maybe that's its own form of calling." They sat in comfortable silence, sipping tea, watching the winter sky. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new refugees needing help, new dangers to navigate. But tonight, they had this moment of peace. In January 1206, word reached Constantinople that Emperor Baldwin had died in Bulgarian captivity. His brother Henry formally became emperor, and the Latin Empire staggered forward, weakened but persistent. The Greeks in Nicaea strengthened their rival court. The Bulgarians continued raiding. The broken city tried to find equilibrium in constant instability. And the Sisters of Refuge continued their work, one day at a time, one person helped at a time, one small victory against darkness at a time. Theodora no longer believed in the grand narratives she had once accepted without question, the triumph of good over evil, the protection of the faithful, the just universe where virtue was rewarded. Those beliefs had died with Abbess Irene, had burned with the convent. But she had found something else, something smaller but perhaps more real. She had found meaning in the specific, in the individual person helped, in the one life saved when millions were lost. She had learned that faith wasn't about believing in cosmic justice, but about choosing to act with compassion in a world that offered little. It wasn't the life she had expected. It wasn't the life she would have chosen. But it was the life she had built from the ruins of everything she had lost, and that made it precious. Late one night, unable to sleep, Theodora returned to the makeshift chapel. She knelt before the simple wooden cross, not in prayer exactly, but in a kind of meditation. She thought about the icons that had been stolen, the churches that had been burned, the sacred spaces that had been profaned. She thought about how much had been lost and how much somehow had been preserved. "We're still here," she whispered to the silent room, to herself, to the memory of Irene, to whatever might be listening in the vast darkness. "You tried to break us, but we're still here. And we'll keep being here, keep helping, keep surviving, keep building something worthwhile from these ashes." She didn't know if that was enough. She didn't know if meaning could be constructed from trauma, if healing could truly happen after such comprehensive destruction. She only knew that trying was the only option she had. Behind her, she heard soft footsteps. Maria appeared in the doorway, carrying a lamp. "Couldn't sleep either?" Maria asked. "Too much thinking," Theodora admitted. "Want to talk about it?" Theodora stood, her knees protesting after so long on the hard floor. "I was thinking about what we've become, whether Abbess Irene would recognize us, whether we're still nuns in any meaningful sense, or if we're just women who used to be nuns and are now something else entirely." "Does it matter?" Maria asked. "I mean, does the label matter as much as the work?" "Probably not," Theodora said. "But I spent 27 years thinking of myself a certain way. It's strange to realize that person doesn't exist anymore." "She exists," Maria said gently. "She's just evolved. You're still the woman who illuminated manuscripts with such care. You're just also the woman who learned to fight, who leads a resistance cell, who chooses survival over martyrdom. All of that is you." Theodora smiled. "When did you become so wise?" "When I stopped pretending I had all the answers," Maria replied. "Come on, let's get some sleep. We have patients coming in the morning, and Alexios said he might have 3 new refugees for us to shelter. We need to be rested." They walked together back to the sleeping quarters, 2 women who had survived the unsurvivable, who had built something new from the wreckage of their old lives, who faced an uncertain future with determination rather than faith, because determination was something you could control. As Theodora lay down on her narrow bed, listening to the familiar sounds of the house settling, the breathing of the other women, the distant sounds of the city, she felt something she hadn't experienced in a long time. Not happiness exactly, not peace, but something close to acceptance. They were alive, they were helping others, they were making choices that mattered. In a world that had shown them the depths of human cruelty, they had chosen to remain human, to remain compassionate, to remain committed to something larger than their own survival. It wasn't redemption. The trauma would never be erased, the losses never restored, but it was a way forward, a path through darkness that led, if not to light, then at least to the possibility of dawn. Theodora closed her eyes, and for the first time in months, slept without nightmares. The next morning began with rain, a cold winter storm that washed the streets and turned the unpaved roads to mud. Theodora woke to the sound of it drumming against the shutters, mixed with voices from below. Maria was already up, treating an early patient in the infirmary. She dressed quickly and descended to find Helena in the kitchen, preparing their morning meal of porridge and dried fruit. The smell of cooking grains filled the air, ordinary and comforting. "Alexios sent word," Helena said without looking up from her stirring. 3 refugees tonight, as he predicted, 2 women and a child, Greek family fleeing Latin taxation that's left them destitute. "We'll make room," Theodora said automatically. They always made room. After breakfast, the work of the day began in earnest. Patients came to Maria's infirmary with winter ailments, coughs, fevers, infections. Theodora helped where she could, holding patients still for treatment, fetching supplies, offering comfort. Ekaterine managed the household, negotiating with merchants, organizing supplies. Helena tended her garden despite the rain, checking on plants, planning for spring. It was ordinary work, routine and unglamorous, but that ordinariness felt like a victory. After 18 months of chaos and uncertainty, they had created routines, established patterns, built something that functioned. That evening, as promised, the refugees arrived, Sophia, her daughter Mariana, and Sophia's elderly mother Theodora, sharing a name with her host. They were soaked from the rain, exhausted from fear, carrying everything they owned in 2 sodden bundles. "Thank you," Sophia whispered as Theodora led them inside. "Thank you for taking us in. We had nowhere else to go." "You're safe here," Theodora assured her. "Rest, eat. Tomorrow we'll help you plan your next steps." As she settled the family into a room, helped them into dry clothes, brought them hot food, Theodora felt the familiar satisfaction of meaningful work. This was why they continued, not for grand political resistance or theological principles, but for moments like these, frightened people finding safety, children getting warm meals, families staying together. Later, after the refugees were settled and the house had quieted for the night, Theodora stood again at the window, looking out at the rain-washed city. Constantinople gleamed wet and silver in the moonlight that broke through the clouds, beautiful and broken, enduring despite everything. She thought about the journey that had brought her here, from a merchant's daughter to a novice nun, to an illuminator of manuscripts, to a survivor of atrocity, to a leader of a community that defied easy categorization. Each transformation had felt like death at the time, an ending of who she had been, but each had also been a beginning, a becoming. She didn't know what she was becoming now. She only knew she was still becoming, still growing, still finding ways to be human in a world that had tried to strip her humanity away. Behind her, she heard the familiar sounds of her household, Maria's footsteps in the infirmary, Helena humming as she organized the kitchen for tomorrow, the refugees' soft voices as parents comforted a child. These were her people now, her community, the family she had chosen, or that had chosen her. It wasn't what she had planned. It wasn't what she had imagined that morning in April 1204, when she had sat in the scriptorium applying gold leaf to vellum, believing the world was ordered and just and comprehensible. But it was real. It was meaningful. It was a life built from ruins, imperfect and precarious, but undeniably alive. Theodora smiled slightly, touching the wooden cross she still wore beneath her habit, the only piece of her old life that remained. Then she turned from the window and went to help Maria with the last of the evening's work, ready to face whatever tomorrow might bring. Because tomorrow would come, and they would be here to meet it. Still surviving, still helping, still human, still here. Constantinople, Byzantine Empire, April 1204, January 1206. Historical note, the Fourth Crusade and the sack of Constantinople. In April 1204, represent one of history's greatest betrayals. Latin crusaders, meant to liberate Jerusalem, instead attacked and conquered the Christian Byzantine capital, causing destruction from which the Byzantine Empire never fully recovered. While this story's specific characters are fictional, their experiences reflect the documented trauma suffered by Constantinople's citizens during the occupation. The systematic violence against religious communities, the destruction of libraries and cultural treasures, and the establishment of the Latin Empire are historical facts. The Greek resistance based in Nicaea eventually reconquered Constantinople in 1261, but the city never regained its former glory, ultimately falling to the Ottoman Turks in 1453.